Hey folks, this is a bit of a fastball. We decided that we were going to have this conversation on Friday. We were hopefully going to have Shabnam Raja join us. Unfortunately, she's not been able to make it. So Richard and I are going to have a brief exploration of the idea of perspective and projection. Now, the reason this has come about is about a month ago, I had a conversation with Shabnam, who's a coach for kind of executives. And we were chatting away, and she just dropped this perspective bomb on me that I wasn't expecting, and that has been turning over in my head ever since. You know, it's very, very in line with all of my stuff that I talk about with the Theodoloop. And I think I've come to a place where I have something that I would like to explore with another kind of traveler on this road. And Richard's also a coach, and he's been doing a lot of work about sort of internal mental models and you know, where these hidden things trip us up. So I thought he was a great person to chat with, and then, you know, Shabnam, who actually dropped this knowledge bomb on me in the first place, would have been awesome as well. But hopefully we'll do a follow-up with her at some point. So the idea here is that, you know, we always talk about perspective. You know, perspective is very important. We need to know what perspective we're examining things from. But we also need to know how the things that we have perspective on come to be. So, and this was the thing that Shabnam sort of dropped on me. So we were talking about, you know, internal monologues. And I said something along the lines of, you know, my internal monologue is one that is always running. I'm always talking to myself. And the perspective bomb that Shabnam dropped on me was that, well, you know, that's not really your voice, right? Sounds like you. And that is the thing that has been, you know, coming back to me since. So we're going to dive into this. It's going to be an interesting, I don't know where this conversation is going to go, but it should be fun at least. So let's welcome Richard. Richard, hi, it's been a long time, mate. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, thank you for inviting me back on with this incredibly simple, easy topic.
Yeah, yeah, no pressure. I mean, you've been doing some pretty eclectic reading yourself, haven't you? And so this isn't exactly going to be like we're breaking completely new ground for you. So tell us what you've been up to for the last little while.
Yeah, sure. Well, the first thing I've been doing is reading Descartes' Error, which I really recommend. So that is a book about Descartes, the famous French philosopher, or whatever he was exactly saying, and his quote, I think, therefore I am. And the author of the book, a neurologist called Antonio Damasio, I think he's Portuguese, basically over his years has studied this and debunked what he calls Descartes' error, which is that actually our thinking comes from a much deeper emotional place, and that influences and impacts all of our, or a lot of our thoughts and decisions in ways that we simply don't realize is even happening. So that's been fascinating. Obviously, as a coach, you have, you know, in those sort of deep conversations that you have with people, you're always trying to sort of understand where their thoughts, ideas, feelings are coming from, without necessarily getting too much into that therapeutic space. So yeah, I think really for me, I suppose if I summarize my interest in this space and this conversation, it's the extent to which, or, you know, how much does our subconscious drive our real-time perspectives. And yeah, let's just, I can give some further context to where that question's come from me. But yeah, let's just unpack it.
All right, so let me explain what I mean by perspective and projection, and then actually this, you know, given what you've been reading, that actually ties in really well. So just to take a bit of a step back, so I've obviously been, you know, pretty deep down the Theodoloop rabbit hole over the last, you know, year or so, maybe a bit less. And, you know, OODA, for people that are new to it, stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. It's a kind of not a decision making, it's a sense making framework. And, you know, some of the things that I've been reading lead me to think that it's a good it's a good description of general kind of cognition as well. So what I mean by perspective and projection is that, you know, we have our perspective on the world, right? And, you know, this is our experiences, everything else. You know, the things that we see in front of us or we observe are always sort of observed through our perceptual filters. But when you think about, and you know, this is to Shabnam's kind of point to me, when you think about how those filters get built, so we have this, you know, let's almost say it's like several slices of tinted glass, right? We've got these shadows of our past experiences, which is our our internal kind of view of the world is. But how do those shadows actually get there? Well, they get projected from our experiences. So, you know, when you're a kid and something bad happens to you, that's one example of that. When a good experience happens to you, that's another example of that. Depending on the level of, or you know, your phase of development in life, what phase of development you're in. You know, if you're a baby and something bad happens, you don't have any kind of language, but you still have that shadow in some way. And if you're a kid or a teenager, that shadow is mediated by what you're able to understand and articulate. But the thing is, when those shadows make when they cause a kind of perspective on something that you're viewing now, let's say, I don't know, you're going to stand up and do a talk, and there's a little voice inside your head that's saying, you're going to look stupid, people are going to laugh at you, right? What Shabnam said, which I completely agree with, is you actually experience that as yourself, right? You experience that as your own voice, but actually it's an amalgamation of all of these different past experiences that are kind of projected into your voice. So you can't kind of, not without, you know, pretty deep reflection, you can't pick out which parts of that come from which parts of your past experience. It's all kind of smushed together, and that's your perspective. But there's another perspective, which is that is happening, and that gives you a little bit more freedom to interact with this kind of, you know, your internal models, and that sort of speaks to Gödel's incompleteness theorem, where it's, you know, very difficult to, where in logic, you can't understand a system in terms of the rules of the system. You have to take an external perspective, and I mean, you know, we're not logic. You know, we're not a series of logic gates, but I think that principle applies, right? So perspective is both our own perspective on the world, but also our own perspective on ourselves. You know, can we step outside of the models that we create and try and look at them objectively? So that was that. Come in, tell me what you think.
I've become increasingly fascinated by the extent to which our perspectives are influenced by our early life experiences. The other book I've read again is the Gabor Mate book, When the Body Says No.
So similar to the Body Keeps the Score, I guess.
Yeah, do you know what? I got through the first third of When the Body Keeps the Score, and then he started talking about Rorschach tests, and I forced myself to put it down. But I was about to pick it up again, and I can't find it. But yeah, it's a really similar theme.
Yeah, and I've read a book ages ago, which I consider really influential on me, which is Dan Siegels Mindset.
Okay, I haven't read that.
Yeah, so he's a therapist, but his background is neuroscience.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if he's Buddhist, but his interventions all tend to be based in mindfulness. But the book's really interesting because he describes a case study, but then he also describes the kind of neurological changes that he thinks are being made by the mindfulness intervention that he's helped this client to have. Fascinating. Really, really interesting.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. And there's loads of Gabor Mate stuff on YouTube. They're really, really good. I mean, I'll absolutely annihilate this, but his fundamental thesis is that that our brain and sort of thoughts have a physical impact upon our body, mainly due to, so for example, when we are stressed, we are secreting adrenaline and cortisol. Effectively what happens now, that in the right circumstances, that's good, that's a survival mechanism. Our body needs that to survive. When we move into later life and we have stressful events, which are, to your point, a bit like your public speaking example, actually our body goes into that state due to something that we learned when we were younger for whatever reason, and that sits with us in our subconscious. So, you know, we're getting into the role of the subconscious here and how it unknowingly influences us and can actually cause us, you know, Gabor Mate talks about people who've experienced very serious trauma. And the influence that then has on us in later life. And, you know, how, and I really do agree with him. I think, you know, anyone who suffers from sort of addiction and bad addiction, you can see that they're really just covering something up, or using that as a crutch to cover up some, or, you know, support themselves through some deeply painful mental processing. So, I mean, I think, without wanting to go too far down that rabbit hole, it's not important, but possibly slightly off track. I think the thing for me, you use the word logic, you know, our brains aren't logic gates, but I think a part of the problem in recent years is that people have sort of, you know, tried to suggest that they are, and that humans are 100% rational creatures. And I think that's where we've kind of shifted back towards a place where we're accepting that humans are not 100% rational creatures. So to your point about OODA, decision making, sense making, perspectives, projections, I think fundamentally, what's this about? For me, it's about the fact that there's a whole lot going on in here that is influencing all those things. We think we are being rational individuals as we make those decisions, choose those options, whatever it is. But actually, there's this whole load of stuff going on subconsciously that is influencing that. And back to Damasio's book, what he's saying is that we should embrace that, not fight it. And then it took my brain off into this whole debate around, should you or shouldn't you trust your intuition?
Oh, that's a deep one, isn't it?
Yeah.
I just wanted to pick up on one of the things you said about trauma. So obviously, trauma is a completely subjective. Relativity is completely subjective there. So there's an example in Mindsight that really kind of brought it home for me. Is that this woman who was sort of emotionally dead, really. She was in her 40s. She had a couple of kids. She'd been divorced, and in working with Dan Siegel, she'd basically been able to pick out a point in her past where she decided to turn her emotions off when she was 12.
Right.
And the thing that triggered her to do that was subjectively, from my point of view, not a massive thing at all. It was like, she was rejected. She felt rejected by her dad when he remarried, and he was dismissive of her feelings, and that was that very simple kind of trigger sent her off a completely different way. I mean, obviously, I think her mother had passed away or something, so there was obviously some fragility there as well. But it's so interesting that these decision points or these experience points that create these projections in for us can be, to another person, completely innocuous. And likewise, you can have people that have been in horrendous combat and come out with absolutely no issues at all.
Yep.
And then you can have others that perhaps even just went to a war zone, never had anything bad happen to them, and have PTSD. And sometimes I think certainly in the veteran community, this idea that PTSD has to be caused by trauma. I mean, often when you have someone who opens up and they tell you about what's going on, often it comes out that actually their childhood was pretty pretty horrific,
Yeah.
pretty bad. And it's actually something there that, perhaps they joined the forces and all of that kind of went away because they had this purpose and this kind of direction. Anyway, we're getting off a little bit into the weeds there. But
no, well, we are. But I was watching an interview with a veteran who suffered from PTSD, and the first thing in the interview that he brought up, I almost intuitively knew he would, was his childhood background, which was not good. And he was a big strapping US Marine, and he I can't remember whether it was Iraq or Afghanistan, but yeah, he was suffering from PTSD. I don't know what the science is, but I would hazard a guess there is a link, between those experiences and the propensity to trigger traumatic experiences in the future.
Another interesting kind of angle on the trauma side of things is that when you have when your kind of chemical environment in your brain is very, very stressed. I think I can't remember. I don't have the background for this, but there's the way your brain lays down memories. I think it might be hypothalamus or the amygdala. I can't remember which, but essentially that sort of switches off. So you still have these experiences. You still have the memories, but the bit that should get flipped to say that this is in the past isn't flipped. So then when you're reminded of those, and when you have your deja vu experience, loud bang or something like that, your body doesn't, or your mind, or whatever combination of those two things, doesn't have the context to say, no, this is in the past. It can only conclude that this is happening right now, and you need to panic about it. You need to flap about it.
Yeah.
When you consider all of the ways our perceptions and our this internal what's the word, sort of hologram we make of the world around us. When you consider all the ways that can go badly, I mean, it's a wonder that we function at all sometimes.
Well, this is what I mean. Yeah, and just to link to that, I mean, certainly I do joke with people now. The fight or flight response has got an enormous enormous amount to answer for in terms of how it drives human behavior.
Yeah,
it really is one of the most fundamental responses of human beings in terms of how we make sense and react to our environment and the impact that it has. So that fascinates me.
Did you ever read Sand Talk, by the way?
I haven't got around to it yet.
No. So we touched on this briefly before, but one of the most impactful parts of that book for me was that, in fact, it might not have been the book. It might have been one of the podcasts that Tyson Yunkaporta was in. Is that he says that the fight or flight response is a projection of Westerners trying to imagine what it would feel like to be a Westerner in in an indigenous person's kind of they do that whole kind of, you're walking through a tiger and the tiger jumps out at you. Yeah, he says that whole the whole kind of fight or flight thing is a fallacy based on Westerners incorrectly projecting what they would feel like in that situation, not what somebody who had grown up and lived in that situation would feel like, i.e. the person in that situation is so in tune with their environment that they would know where the tigers are in a way. So
absolutely. Well, so that's one of my theories. So it's something called the evolutionary mismatch theory, which is basically that, I think, that is to say that we are, because evolution moves so slowly, human beings are basically 100,000 years ahead of evolution. We still think like our ancestors.
Yeah,
we are still wired to be on that savannah or in that cave. All these modern, these modern ways of living, be it your phone, be it the way that relationships change, be it the way that family structures are different, the houses we live in, all those things, we often just can't cope. It overwhelms our ancestral brain.
Yeah. No, I agree with that.
And that takes us to this place. Now, the thing about what you just mentioned about we like to know where the tigers are, this links to my thing I've been playing around in my mind around uncertainty. Humans hate uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
We're not wired for it. Now, the reason we're not wired for it, I think a great example is we want to know where everything is because and what's coming. Because if we can predict that, then we can remove that uncertainty. So this talks to the Slate Star Codex block we were just talking
I thought you'd come on to that. Yeah.
We humans, we predict and then we get feedback rapidly, like multiple times a second in our brains, again, subconsciously.
Yeah.
We don't, I say to people, we make life and death decisions multiple times every day. When I go to the shop and I cross the road, I'm making a life or death decision without even realizing it.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy when you think about it.
Yeah. But I mean, that's exactly the fight or flight response. Your experience allows you to build that mental simulation of your environment, which means that making the decision or not making the decision can happen completely underneath the threshold of consciousness, because it's automatic. You have everything you need to make that decision there and then. But you're right, like our craving for certainty is because we crave that, it's all to do with energy. I think with that Slater Star Codex thing that we read, and the free energy theory, that's basically saying that we're trying to minimize energy expenditure by making good predictions. Because when you get your prediction wrong, you have to do loads of brain stuff, highly technical term. You have to do loads of cognitive work, which is obviously this 20% of our energy expenditure or something. So when you get something wrong, there's a real sort of thermodynamic drive to make better predictions. So that's probably why we are so driven to certainty, even when we're in very, very uncertain circumstances. Like COVID and things at the moment. I see every day people trying to combat misinformation with facts. And the only thing that combats misinformation is a better story. Facts are causing people to do too much work and use too much energy, and it's just not how people work.
And I think and I agree. And to bring it back, I should say the Slate Star Codex article we're talking about is book review.
Keep talking, I'll look it up and stick it in the chat.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's Surfing Uncertainty, isn't it? And it's basically about predictive processing, which, as I understand it, is sort of science and neurology's latest theory on how the human brain works. And it's this top-down, bottom-up. So the top-down is literally what you, as I understood it, is literally what you kind of visually and neurally take in, and then
that's bottom-up.
Is that the bottom-up? Okay. So the other part then is literally is what we've been talking about earlier. It's all your programmed from whilst you're in the womb, because that's when it starts. It's your priors, it's your ways that you've made sense of the world up until now, and the brain basically brings those two things together and arrives at some kind of, don't know what he calls it, but reality, isn't it? Your reality. Which is to your whole point about projection, really, because you are then projecting that is your reality. It's absolutely fascinating. It's a great post. I must get the book.
I mean, I actually had the book and I hadn't read it, so it's queued up on my Kindle. But so a couple of little nuances there, which I think feed directly into the wash-up call I had with Glenn Murphy on the Theodoloop. We dug into this a bit. So your priors is your structure, right? That's your orientation on the world, and it gets there by being projected in through your experience. So your experience is projected onto all of your other previous priors to make another kind of change in your internal model, if you like. So that's your top down. And then when you get conflicting bottom up information, which given the volume of information that we deal with day to day and how different our environment is probably happens a lot more often than it used to. then you've got a couple of choices. One is that you can take an action to try and, you say, okay, this is my view of the world. This is what our reality is telling me through my observations. I want to bring them together. So I'm going to take an action to move this one over here. Or you can ignore it. You can say, well, my internal model is based on lots of experience. This is bullshit. And essentially the brain rewrites that bottom up stream to say, no, you're wrong, which obviously happens a lot as well. I've got a story about this. I'll tell you in a minute. Motorbiking story. Or you can change your model. So that is there. The brain is like, oh no, this is so profoundly different to what I expected that I need to change my model so that when this happens again in future, I don't get surprised, because it's minimization of surprises. In the literature, free energy theory calls this surprise minimization, or what was it called in that weird word in the book? What was the word?
In surfing uncertainty.
No, it was in surfing uncertainty. Yeah, surprisal. That's the one.
Surprisal. Yeah.
So okay, let me tell you about how this played out for me once when I was.
The goal is to minimize surprisal, to become so good at predicting the world, conditional on the predictions sent by higher levels, that nothing ever surprises.
Yeah, exactly. So let me tell you how I almost killed myself by screwing this up.
Okay.
So not long after I passed my bike test, I had to take the bike in for MOT or a service or something. So I was riding along. It was a nice day, familiar road not far from my house, straight road, and I was sat behind somebody. I'm on a nice, powerful motorbike that I've just recently bought and really enjoy riding, and I'm sat behind someone in a car doing a couple of miles per hour under the speed limit, and I've got a dead straight, very enticing open road ahead of me. So I'm sitting there like, come on, give me that road, and I'm already, my desire is now shaping my perception, because I saw an indicator come on. Now I don't know what part of me screwed this up, whether they flashed the wrong indicator, or whether I just, from my eyes moving around, I misread a signal and my bottom upstream was hijacked by my top down desire. But I saw that they were indicating left and they were drifting right, and it was a very tight left turn. So I thought, okay, they're going right, they're going left. Perfect. That means that I can overtake. Completely forgetting that you never overtake someone who's turning, because it's a stupid thing to do, even if you can see. Now, as it turns out, as I went to start overtaking, it turns out that they actually weren't indicating left. Or if they were indicating left, they certainly weren't fucking going left. They drifted right, and then they carried on drifting right into my path. And I just managed to zip round them and carried on. But immediately afterwards, I thought, how on earth did that happen? Like, how did I make such a basic error making sense of my world? And, I've obviously been interested in this for a long time. And I know that our senses are in that we construct a load of the reality, or, the simulation that we make around us. But I think that was a really stark example of just how much of a simulation it is, and how much we fill in around the edges.
That's what has really impacted me over the last month or so, with with the reading I've been doing and certain experiences, is just how much we weave our way through this wonderful life in way less control than we think we're in.
Yeah,
way less control. To your example there, just shows your brain is doing all these things at a subconscious level that are impacting directly how you make, in that case, a life or death decision. And it's far less of it is within your rational, logical control than you think. Now that's just that's bonkers to me.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, just to dig into that example again a bit further, like, I wasn't consciously saying I was going to overtake. I desired to be in front of the car, right? I desired to be on that open road, opening the throttle, getting some adrenaline, getting some excitement. And there was no conscious decision. It was like, okay, conditions look good, bang, go for it. And I don't even, we could dig into our memories another point, but I don't remember, taking the conscious decision to say, okay, that's good, I can overtake.
Yeah.
Now, what the chemical environment in my brain immediately after that has done has, given my internal structure a massive kick up the arse to say, that was fucking stupid. You nearly ended yourself. Don't do that again. So now, that has given me the opportunity to learn and to change my top downs, my priors, and to be really, really careful about, not taking stupid risks around junctions. So, it's always a loop, right? There's always a, we are an OODA loop, essentially. We're a strange OODA loop, as Hofstadter might say, if he knew Boyd.
So what do you think Boyd would say about this in terms of, because I've not read Boyd anywhere near as extensively as you have, but I can't recall him talking about the sort of emotional, psychological. I'm not sure probably the thinking wasn't as advanced as it is now when he was writing. What do you think he would say about, if you layered over sort of Damasio and emotions onto Boyd's OODA loop, what do you think Boyd would say now?
That's a very, very good question. Something that I'm fascinated by, because, reading something like the Slater Star Codex and free energy theory and some of these other, concepts about psychology and sense making, I'm actually stunned that the OODA loop fits the general structure of it as well as it does, right? So from an OODA loop point of view, what happened to me on my bike was that my implicit guidance and control caused me to screw up my observations, right? My observations were hijacked by my implicit guidance and control because my orientation was focused on what I wanted. And then the other implicit guidance and control loop went straight to action without a decision because it thought that it had made a pattern match that it could rely on and didn't need to bother the guy in charge up here.
Yeah.
And there's all of those, the stuff in the Pentagon, the genetic heritage and experiences and everything else. I mean, that to me is just the priors. That is your ever-changing graph or hierarchy of priors that start with identity at the top and end up with kind of experience and motor control towards the edges. I've started to think more and more actually that the OODA loop diagram that Boyd drew is, what's the word? It's sort of capturing how people can think about the OODA loop, because it's this, you go from the circles with the dots on, the decision cycle, which is a linear kind of, you observe, you orient, you decide, you act. That's where most people come up against it. And then you get the diagram that has the lines, which is better, but still a little bit limited, because I actually have come to think of it much more closely to the Slater Star Codex review or the Surfing Uncertainty view of this kind of Bayesian inference engine that has a stream of events and a stream of priors, and that messy meeting in the middle.
Yeah. Okay. The one thing I did want to mention, I was just going to take it back to what we were talking about a good 10, 15 minutes ago now, actually, was this, the certainty point around, it was just your point about tigers. So where I got to with this is that if you're one of our ancestors and what do you want to know when you walk out that cave or out that, your hut on the savannah? You want to know where the tigers are, because if you know where the tigers are, you know that you can avoid them or keep out their way. I just thought it's a great analogy for how we humans now think about the world and why we make predictions or seek predictions, because predictions give us certainty.
They give us the illusion of certainty.
Sorry, that's the most important point. They give us the illusion of certainty. Exactly. Yeah. Which is why people crave predictions, and we could go off on the whole expert kinefin route with this. We look to experts to make predictions, give us certainty, but actually we know that experts are great in a complicated world, but we don't live in a complicated world. We live in a complex world.
Yeah.
So again, the brain's off. The brain's doing its thing again.
Yeah.
Craving that certainty, because that's what calms our limbic system down. That's what makes the amygdala and hippocampus not flare up. So it's all linked, this stuff.
Yeah, 100%. Actually, there's a good segue here. So, we talked a bit before about in when we chatted on Friday about mistakes that fast growth companies make, or not mistakes, but the difficulties, that the experiential issues that fast growth companies have. So I just want to make one more point about the difference between the kind of the historical savannah environment and our current environment, and then we could spend maybe the last 10 minutes or so just exploring what this looks like for people in groups. So first of all, in our ancestral environment, there's obviously much less kind of artificial input, i.e. none, right? You just have to be in tune with your environment, and that environment hasn't changed, which means that experiences can be passed down unchanged through generations. So you've got this kind of, assuming you've got language, and I think most cultures have had that for a long time. You can pass down chunks of knowledge so that you don't have to learn from experience by being chased by a tiger. That one time your grandfather was chased by a tiger and managed to get away with it, had the same effect as me and indicators and junctions on my motorbike. Right. So is that, it's not necessarily a simpler environment, but it's a more constrained environment. No, that's wrong as well. But it's a different environment than we are now. Like the kind of explosion of experiential difference in today's world compared to before, all of the different complexities and things that are impinging on our attention versus learning how to live well in an ecosystem and environment. So that's one thing. And then we've got, overlaid on top of that, we've got, let's say, tech companies now. Like I've worked in several that have manifestly done a poor job of understanding and operating within their environment and created, what I would equate to a mental condition in a brain, whatever the cultural equivalent of a mental condition is. I see many companies that are growing fast having that. So just say a little bit about, the kind of coaching work that you do with leaders, and what all the stuff that we've been talking about looks like when it's multiple people rather than just one person and in different kind of parts of their brain.
Well, I think to your point, the place that businesses get to is that state of confusion brought about by, I suppose I'd never thought about it like this, but you could almost say that some businesses get into a fight or flight state. One of the fundamental symptoms of being in a fight or flight state is an inability to concentrate and make good decisions. Your prefrontal cortex detaches from your hippocampus amygdala. It's all going on there. So all the intelligent, they say that the prefrontal cortex is the CEO of your brain. So I must always wanted to write a post about that. When you think about the CEO of a business, they are there to make considered, good, intelligent decisions. But it's much harder to do that when the business it's organizationally and culturally is all over the place. Everything gets confused. So in the worst case scenario, and I've seen plenty of businesses like that, because it's often the reason that they fall apart. They're in the equivalent of a fight or flight stage, you could argue. I don't know, it'd be interesting to get other people's thoughts on that. It's confusion reigns. So to your question then, what are you doing in a lot of the coaching work I do? which is why I often refer to it as business therapy, is you're effectively trying to unpack where all that comes from, where that confusion comes from. What are those culturally? What are the priors of the business that have led to culture being what it is?
Yeah.
How do you break all that down? Now, that is, what is it, Jung and making the unconscious conscious in many ways. And again, I've never thought it like this before, but in leadership coaching, that's what you're trying to help a leader or a group of leaders do, is unpack all this stuff and make it conscious.
Yeah. So you're offering a perspective on their projections.
Yeah. And a lot of coaching is around self-awareness and realizations, and adding that. I think of it as you're shining a torch, but from another angle, to light up something within that hasn't had a light shone on it before.
Okay, so on that note, I have a bit of a perspective on having read Slater Star Codex and started to kind of, I think about OODA in terms of way beyond individuals. I think about it in terms of organizations as well. So one of the things that I think is a big problem and is a growing problem, because as businesses move more quickly and the environment changes more quickly, one of the things that I think is a big problem is that we are in businesses, and based on our kind of cultural heritage in the West anyway, we are way over indexed on the top down priors, i.e. the CEO's idea, the senior leader's idea, the experienced leader that you bring in's previous experience, without necessarily knowing that well, you can't know, but without considering the difference between the environment in which that experience was built and the environment in which it's being currently deployed.
Yeah.
So what happens there is you end up with this kind of bias towards top-down priors, and I think all of our agile software development methodologies reinforce that. Our ideas of thinking of things like a factory that needs to be optimized.
Yeah.
And what we miss, which is even more critical and getting more so, is that we don't get that bottom-up experiential sensory, where our people hit the environment, or where our people are in contact with the environment. Their voices are overwhelmed by the top-down priors way before they should be. So they never kind of bubble up and create new structures, new surprisal. It's all kind of, it's all top down.
Ben, you're making this very easy for me. That's absolutely perfect. So one of the things that I was going to bring up, but the next point I was going to make, is an exact build on that. So, and I think it's where some of the deeper work in leadership coaching and leadership development comes in. Sense making and perspective taking.
Yeah.
So to everything we've talked about so far, the CEO of a business, the leadership team, is influenced by all that stuff that has come before them within them, both within their lives and also within the culture of the business, if they've been there from the start.
Yep.
This kind of next leap, and it is a bit of a leap, I think, in the leadership development space, is around how you understand or seek to understand the perspectives and sense making of others, because we're all humans. We all make sense of our world in a different way. We all have different perspectives for everything we've talked about. And to your point about top-down leadership versus one that actually a leader or a group of leaders that can kind of go out there and engage with their team in a emotionally intelligent, empathetic way. But it's about more than there's a lot of talk about emotional intelligence, and it's super important, but there's another step beyond just emotional intelligence. It's that next step to be able to actually understand, where is this person coming from? What are they thinking? Why are they thinking it? And it talks the whole kind of, this diversity agenda as also being about how you draw in, you go out, you build this business, you pay lots of money for all these awesome people, highly intelligent people, and then you don't listen to what they're telling you. In the worst cases.
And that feeds into one of my other areas of interest from a kind of the military background is this idea of decentralized command, right? Because once you can let go and you can build that skill in understanding different people's perspective, you can start to allow those people to take some of the cognitive load off you by not needing to know all of the stuff that's going on. So that means that you're, from the terms of the surfing uncertainty, is that you're now allowing those two streams to meet closer to where the actual observations and therefore more likely to be in tune with reality are happening. But so this is something I've been playing with a little bit, an idea of a kind of communications algebra. So if we've got like a tree-like structure where the outside is the leaves, right, and the inside is the leadership or the trunk. In a very information-rich environment, which we're all inherently in right now, you can't be expected as a leader to be able to take all of that in from everyone in your organization at the edges beyond probably, I don't know, like 8 to 10 people. Right. 8 to 10 as a group means that you're all operating as one, and the leader can have kind of, understanding of all the things. Beyond that, you need to have some kind of aggregation, right? So you need to have this kind of, as a leader, your job switches from understanding everything to creating the direction of travel and the constraint system within which everyone operates. And then you're able to aggregate what comes up from the outside. So, instead of hearing about every little thing and every release to production, you hear about the things that make a marked difference to how you need to think about the direction of the company. So you're aggregating the bottom ups only in the way that your cognitive load is when you have to change your priors. And I'm saying you as a leader, but leadership team or the culture or whatever, whatever lives in the middle of that thing. If you're aggregating, then you're only getting the signal, and you're reducing a load of the noise.
Yeah, I'm thinking, what did you call it what's it called in the military? Did you say
decentralized command?
Decentralized command. See, I'm aligning that with, or would that align with boundary setting?
Yes. So you can't
That's
really.
my understanding of decentralized command is that the top level kind of orders and directions are given, but then the people on the ground are, and Boyd talks about this, doesn't he, in terms of are then left to interpret. Is it mission command as well?
Mission command, exactly. Yeah. So you set the direction as the leader. You set the constraints or the boundaries within which your lower downs or further outs are allowed, are empowered to operate. And then within those boundaries, they figure it out for themselves. It's very similar to how OKRs should be used. And this is, we definitely don't have time to dig into all the dysfunctions that OKRs can cause, but my understanding of OKRs, having read Andy Grove's work and being sort of making these links, is that that's how OKRs are supposed to work, right? You're supposed to provide some space to operate within, set the kind of outcome that you want, and within that, your people are free to operate.
Yeah, so that's interesting, and I've not thought about it in that way, and we should have another conversation. But yes, but I think that's one of the challenges in why you hear, let's face it, for every good story you hear about OKRs, you hear an equally bad one. And it makes me wonder the extent to which it's a leadership challenge, and a leadership in terms of the development of the leader or the leadership team. So it's just an observation on that, and it's something I'm writing about at the moment. It's why I sent that Kinefin tweet out about startups at the weekend. So certainly boundary setting, boundary setting and perspective taking are two of the kind of big leaps in what you would like to see, I would argue, in leaders. So think kind of seed stage, Series A, a lot of the, if you read a lot of the literature, it's in the complicated space. It's how to, it's how to do this, how to do that, do these three things. And if you piece all those different parts together, you will get this coherent whole. The reality is it won't necessarily be a coherent whole, because once you get to that point, you're in a complex system.
Yeah.
So the point I'm making is actually these leadership skills go beyond just being able to have a vision, tell the story, be high in EQ, to actually these more advanced. And I think you start to see this in Series A plus B, C, D, these leaders who they step beyond just that functional doing towards this space of not just what they know, but how they think and how that impacts their leadership. And that's where you get into this world of boundary setting. Still, you're communicating a vision, you're telling a story, but you're also setting boundaries within which your highly capable team can operate. You're also doing more of the perspective taking. You're almost, you're soaking it up like a sponge, and then you're using that yourself and with your leadership team to influence your decisions. I've got a post in mind. I really think that's the difference between what I would say, the difference between a founder and a true CEO.
That's actually that's a perfect place to leave it on. There's a great example of this actually. Ryan Peterson of Flexport.
Okay.
So Flexport is a phenomenally fast-growing startup. I think they started in 2015.
Right.
And Ryan is a student of Boyd, also a student of this kind of evolutionary kind of complexity thinking. Some of the books he recommends are definitely sort of speak to his experience on that. But he recorded an interview which I kind of advise anyone to go look at with Y Combinator. I'll link it in the notes. But one of the things he says is that my role I'm paraphrasing here. My role switched to setting decision rights. Right, setting the decision rights, i.e. the scaffolding within which people are empowered to make decisions. So I'll link. I think we should probably think about wrapping up now, because it's we'll definitely carry on for considerably longer. So I'll link that interview that Ryan did, and
I will check that out. It's something I'm really working with at the moment.
I think he recommended this book to me, the Origin of Wealth, which is another. It's a sort of an evolutionary kind of hard sciences recapitulation of economics, essentially. Understanding all of this kind of complexity that we've been talking about, and that we are building sense-making organizations. So I think there's definitely more that we can dig into here. We ended up getting a bit far away from the individual perspective. Maybe we could sort of bring that back and talk about that with Shabnam if she has time to look at this. I think a third perspective on all this would be.
Although I'd say I appreciated that in the sense that we started off with the individual perspective and then we moved to the perspective of others. So from a given we both work in the startup growth tech management leadership space, hopefully that was helpful, but it'd be great to riff on that again.
Awesome. All right, well, let's not leave it a couple of months this time. We'll get another one in the books fairly soon.
Brilliant. Thanks Ben, thank you.
I'll end the broadcast. Thanks everyone. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.